There is an assertion in Scripture that at some point in time, an entity known as the man of sin and the son of perdition will be revealed. And so this entity is a part of an apocalypse, a part of a major revelation. And there's also a tie to this entity being revealed and what's known as the great falling away. And so, what we're going to be doing today is looking at the revelation of the man of sin and the son of perdition. Before we delve into this revelation, this apocalypse of this apparent man of sin and son of perdition, I want to point out something very important about this apparent entity. This entity has been identified in Scripture as essentially the father of all humanity. And the way that this person became the father of all humanity was that the other siblings have been removed from the situation, and then this entity was left as the only one that was bringing forth these successive generations. And so that's what we're going to talk about. Now, what we're going to look at is the name of the entity, a little bit of the history of the entity, and a revelation about the ultimate identity of this particular apparent entity. For those of you who are familiar with scripture, you should already know that the entity is Seth, also known as Set, and also related to the construct of Sith. We're going to do this briefly because we're going to do this in segments because it's quite deep, okay? So, this is the first segment, and we're going to be talking about this discrete area of this issue of the man of sin and the son of perdition because this alone is enough to digest for now, and then we can pick up on the rest of it after you've had some time to even process this. And so, one of the things we understand about this Set is, for those of you who don't know, this is an Egyptian deity, by the way. This is also the name of the son of Adam and Eve. This was the third son after Abel and Cain. And so this is supposed to be the son that survived. What's interesting also, we'll go into this, is that Seth's identity seems to be strangely tied to the identity of Cain. It's almost as if they are the same entities, but we're not going to go into that right now. But what we have with Sith, is this entity that is understood as appointed. That's what the name means. The name means a lot more than that, but we will get into that. It means selected one, and very specifically, the chosen one. So hold on to that. This Set deity coming out of Egypt, that is also the name of the child of Adam and Eve that is supposed to be made in the image of Adam, not in the image of God, which is very interesting also if you look at the scripture. And so this entity is appointed, selected, and chosen, and that is the essence or one of the essences of this entity's name or identity. And here in Genesis, you see this naming process and the first presentation of this entity as a child named Seth. And it indicates here, and Adam knew his wife again, and she bare a son and called his name Seth. For God, she said, hath appointed me another seed instead of Abel, whom Cain slew. Now, what's interesting about this whole narrative is that there are punctuations put in here that were likely not there before. And so there are some very interesting dynamics that come up when you take away the punctuation. You just look at the King James Version in its raw form, and you're going to see that. And then when you look at the lexicon in its raw form, you're going to see something else. But the main thing here that we are focusing on is the fact that this entity that Eve birthed Hava, Kava, birth, the entity's name is Seth, which is the same as Set. It is the same name. There's no need in people pointing out, oh, that's a different one, because everything points to this is the same entity. The name is the same, the meaning is the same, and the implications are the same. So let's carry on. And here you have this interesting translation with respect to the KJV without those punctuation marks. And it indicates, and Adam knew his wife again, and she bare a son and called his name Seth, for God said, she hath appointed me another seed instead of Abel, whom Cain slew. The reason why this is important is because if you note, it says, God said, she hath appointed me another seed. Now, the way it was written before, there were punctuation marks that would set something off to make it seem as though Eve was saying that God hath appointed another seed instead of Abel, whom Cain slew. This is interesting because there is this game playing with this name Elohim. And when Elohim is mentioned, that's a plural. However, God is a singular. And so Elohim is supposed to be the masculine plural of Eloah. You remember that. Okay, and so that goes along with this reading without the commas that are presented there. Okay, so I just want to point that out, and then we are going to continue on. Those of you who believe you understand Paleo Hebrew, there's some Paleo Hebrew here, and so if you know this scripture based upon Paleo Hebrew and you want to offer up that particular transliteration, please do so so that we all understand at the same time. It's always interesting to do the raw lexicon because you see that often what you read is not consistent with what the basic words are that were provided, the original words, as far as we know. And so the original words with that whole sentence with Adam and Eve and Seth involves this: Seth for has appointed for me God's seed another instead of Abel. Okay, so what you need to do is try to make sense of all of that in that particular context. But we are moving right along because we see that there is a Seth, and this Seth has been appointed. And if you look at it, you can see the correlation between the word Seth, the name Seth or Set, and the has appointed, which is Set and Sate. Okay. So we're going to continue on here looking at some of the transliterations of that name Set. And you are going to perhaps not, be a little surprised at what we find about this entity that has been identified as the father of all humankind according to scripture. So this is supposed to be a depiction of Set, by the way. Okay, so one transliteration we have, or the translation, the word is Set, S-E-T. The other transliteration of Set is S-E-T-H. And so Set and Seth are seen as synonymous. They are one thing. Okay, so S-E-T-H is the other word for Set, the Egyptian deity Set, and the entity known as the third son of Adam and Eve. It is Set, it is Seth. This is also related to the word Sith. And so that's the S-I-T-H. And when you consider who the Sith are according to the Star Wars narrative, this is all going to make sense when we finish this up in these successive discussions. And then we have Sata or Seta, depends on how you want to say that. And that is S-A-T-A. All of this is Set and Seth. And so this brings us right back around to this whole dynamic of this entity being understood as the appointed one, the selected one, the chosen one. You will often hear individuals identify themselves as the chosen ones. And as with Seth, the question is chosen for what purpose? Chosen to do what? Appointed for what season? Elected or selected for what reason? What we're going to do when we look at this name Seth and Set is we're going to look at some of the transliterations, and this is going to give an indication regarding what Set or Seth has been appointed to do, what this entity is chosen for, and what it means to be the chosen one, this first chosen one in Scripture. If you look very closely, you can see the transliterations coming out of Strong's Concordance for this name Set or Seth. Now we're going to look more deeply at this name in successive discussions, but for right now we are looking at these transliterations, and they are very interesting transliterations. So these are various forms in Hebrew of Set or Seth. We're going to pull out some very specific ones so that you can see very clearly some of the understandings of this Set or this Seth, who is not only this Egyptian deity, but this son of Adam and Eve, and also the ancestor, according to the narrative, of all humankind. That would include you, that would include me, and every other person that is on the planet. So, we're going to continue on here. And so, what we find when pulling out some of those transliterations is a hot mess, literally and figuratively here. So, what we have are transliterations that indicate that Seth is synonymous with Sattani. In other words, Satan. Okay. Set and Seth are also synonymous with the other words that you see on the screen, including that last one. And what's interesting about that last one is that is actually literal. Now, if you recall, when researching the transatlantic slave trade and looking at those maps on the west coast of Africa, we did quite a bit of that. And one of the things that we looked at was this dynamic of these biblical names apparently on the west coast of Africa. And one thing that stood out, and one thing that people used as proof that these were Hebrews, was this desert of Seth. And so, what I want to bring back to your memory is the desert of Seth. And so, yes, indeed, this desert of Set, this desert of all of those transliterations that you just looked at, that was situated on the west coast of Africa. And you can see this is a close up of it here. We're going to look at a couple of other variations so you can see it in context. And here you see it again in association with a number of kingdoms. You see it right below Negro land. Okay. You also see it in association with Guinea. You see it up above the kingdom of Benin. And of course, you see it to the right of Ouida or Judah or the slave coast. And here you see the desert of Seth a little bit more clearly, and you see it related to something called Sama. Okay, this is also associated with Nigrisha. You see Ghana up there at the top, so it's right across from this desert of Seth on this particular map. And this map is from the 1700s. And here on this map, you can see Nagrisha a little bit more clearly. You see Ghana and Ganara. And here you see some additional identifiers on this particular map. So you see something related to Zaire, you see Congo on here, and also interestingly, Brahmas. Also on this Desert of Seth map or Desert of Set map, you see Judah again, you see Biafra again, and of course you see Dahomey on this particular map. What's also noteworthy about this whole Desert of Seth dynamic is that Set, among other things, is the god of the desert. Okay, so that fits right on in with this identity of the desert of Seth. Another thing to keep in mind related to Seth or Set and this entity apparently being the man of sin that's mentioned in Second Thessalonians 2 is that Set or Seth is related to this idea of the sons of tumult, the sons of chaos. So he is the father of chaos, and we're going to look a little bit more deeply at that. Some of this might explain why you have so many identities up under Seth, these entities that identify as the sons of Seth, having these identities that are associated with Apollyon, Abaddon, destruction. So we're going to look at that a little bit more closely, and hopefully you are able to digest this a little bit that we are talking about right now, because it is quite a bit. And of course, the question comes up about why this isn't being taught and why this isn't being discussed in spiritual, religious, theological circles in the mainstream. And so that's a big question right there. Why are we, talking about this here? Why hasn't this been sort of a standard discussion to be able to deconstruct exactly what's going on? Because the average person is not really interested in being a descendant of this entity known as Set or Seth. Most people don't identify with this, but this identity does explain, perhaps, a lot of what goes on in the world in terms of this pervasive chaos and disorder and destruction. Remember, knowledge is power, and stay tuned for the next part of the introduction. If you have anything else to share, please do so. And also, thank you to the channel, the content creator, whose name is going to be put below so that you can see that, who started this conversation after another conversation that we had related to this entity Set. And so we have been on this journey of looking at these entities of destruction for a while. And it was pointed out that this entity also is found in some of the mythos of a particular indigenous collective. And so I'm going to put the link below to that particular channel so that you can then see what that person is talking about. And perhaps that individual will do a special series or a special discussion on this entity known as Set and the relationship between Set or Seth and this indigenous collective that apparently has a narrative about Set.